All right, what's up, internet? It's been a long time since I've recorded anything, and I was kind of feeling inspired for some reason today. I've been wanting to get back to this for a long time, and I played an interesting chess game last night, and I haven't had a chance to analyze it or review it at all, and so I thought this might be a good day to do it, to review it and maybe stream and record some of maybe how I'm going through my game as a total amateur, not really knowing what I'm doing, but seeing what we can learn from an interesting game last night from the San Diego Chess Club's Wednesday Night Chess. This was round 4 of the Sam Barboo Open, Sam is a great guy. He's playing in this tournament, a good friend, so shout out to Sam. All right, so my opponent for this week is Lennart Mathe, rated 1972, very strong player, one of the higher rated folks at the club. So I knew this was going to be a tough match. I played him once a couple months ago with black and was able to win off of a nice little tactic of a bunch of captures in the center early in the game, but definitely kind of got a little lucky in that one. So I knew this was going to be a tough match. So let's just get into it. I've been playing a lot of d4, and there's my recording going. I'm not sure how the audio is balanced and stuff. It's been probably close to a year since I've recorded something like this, so I'll have to check it after the recording. So I've been playing almost exclusively d4 recently, and trying to really understand the theory here. And a lot of people have not been playing d5. I've been noticing a lot of the games I've had lately, a lot of people are playing like the knight f6, e6 kind of Nimzo style stuff. I've played against some folks going with b6 or g6 type systems. So it's kind of nice, refreshing to see a classic Queen's Gambit. Lenny declines. I don't really know how I feel about the move order between knight c3, knight f3. I think they're both fine. Eventually I'm planning on, in most positions, getting the knight to c3, bishop f4, e3. Just the normal kind of setup for Queen's Gambit. I know some folks might do the bishop to g5. I don't know which one's technically supposed to be better, but I've been enjoying these systems with the bishop on f4. I think I've been playing knight f3 a little bit more recently instead of knight c3, just because this bishop b5 has been so popular. So this gives them a little bit of a different look. My opponent just plays the most normal stuff here. Very standard. Bishop e7. This is same thing I would play from black generally in these positions. So I get into my bishop f4. I'm happy with this setup here. Maybe I should turn off the eval for this. Whatever, we can leave it. I haven't totally decided on what my favorite way to review games is. I've not had a chance to do it a lot. Let's do it with the bars and with the lines here and with the arrows showing. All right, so normally I would play castles here with black. Looks like obviously in the opening it doesn't really matter that much what the computer says, but computer likes it. My opponent plays c6, super conservative. This kind of, what do you call this? The Slav triangle kind of structure. So it's almost like he's playing a Slav out of a Queen's Gambit declined system. And so immediately my plan, I feel like for this game early on is all right, I want to take advantage of this bishop. This bishop's going to be really hemmed in, really weak. So after c6, immediately, now I'm starting to think of what kind of plans I have for this game. If they went with the more traditional c5 or castles, then we can play a little more aggressively on the queen side. And that was probably still going to be my plan here with this bishop, but it changes the mindset a little bit. So I go e3, and he plays knight bd7. Excuse me. So yeah, here I figured at some point I was going to trade, because already now I'm thinking about going for the minority attack with these guys here, and trying to go after c6 eventually. Very common type of plan in these systems. And I don't know totally what the theory is on when the best time to exchange is, but I actually did it right here, and the reason was after knight d7 here, I felt like now taking back with the c-pawn becomes really awkward, because knight out here to b5 can cause some problems with d6 and c7, which is why I like this bishop here on f4. If they go for the check, the knight is defended by this bishop, so we can interrupt it with knight e7. I'd be curious to see if the computer likes the knight b5, but it's an uncomfortable idea for sure, which almost forces them into either knight capture or e capture. If the knight captures, I'm going to trade. But basically, we're trying to get them into this structure against our two pawns here that we're going to run down the board. And this bishop doesn't have much to say about it, which is why I kind of like this this strategy against the bishop being really blocked in here. So that's why I decided to trade. As expected, our opponent takes back with the e-pawn, but now this is the value of the computer, right? Is that you can see, okay, what is the computer like if he had taken back with the c-pawn? I was looking at this knight b5 idea. Computer doesn't love it. I don't really know why it wants to play h4. That's interesting. Because h3 is a common move in these structures because, you don't want the knight coming here to win your bishop. Because now that the knight's here, bishop e5 is met by captures. So this kind of idea makes sense. Rook here makes sense. I see. You can go with the bishop, because I was thinking that, on the queen here, that, we're interrupting with the knight. Then they castle, and then it seems like they're fine. So the knight's really not doing that much. It just looks scarier than it is, and they get to castle before we get this check in. And it looks like the computer even likes this one better, because if we block with this, this gets uncomfortable. So this is something that you have to note. This can happen from the white side or black side in these structures, but whenever you have the bishop outside of this pawn chain. So as soon as I played e3, I had to think about this being a problem, but I was not thinking about bishop here. So yeah, I don't know if I would have played knight b5, but yeah, that position seems solid for me, so I was okay with that. But yeah, he took back as expected, and now we're just in the game that we planned. And I go h3, just like in the other line, right? I want to be able to meet knight h5 with bishop h2. Opponent castles. So the reason why I liked going into this set of captures now as opposed to later, or earlier, I mean, is that if you trade earlier in the Queen's Gambit declined and free up their bishop and they get bishop to f5, it can be a pretty nice spot for them. And so I liked doing this trade at the time when I was able to throw in bishop d3, and he's not able to get in bishop f5 because the knight was blocking the bishop. So that was kind of the idea of my move order here. Seems like it plays out okay. Interesting, the computer still likes knight h5. Oh wow. It likes knight h5, bishop h2, g6. I guess it's worried about these light squares, huh? And so it wants to block them up. And then you can either bring the bishop back through here or bring the knight back. Oh, that's interesting. But yeah, this is a comfortable position for white for sure. My opponent played probably the most normal looking move here, rook e8. I castle. He plays knight f8. Again, a very common maneuver in these kind of structures. You get the rook out of the way, and then you can bring the knight into either, most of the time, g6. There's some variations where you might end up with it on e6, depending on what the pawn structure looks like. But yeah, here, almost certainly he's coming to g6. All right, so on knight f8, I see no reason to start my minority attack plan here. There's kind of two ways to start it. You can go a3, b4, which I've done in the past, and I felt like doing something a little different, and so I went with the rook b1 method instead. And interesting that the computer actually likes knight e5 here. I wonder what it recommends in here. Because what do you do against this e5 pressure? Oh, it wants to just block it. Interesting. And this is supposed to be nice, yeah. I mean, this does look solid here. It's nice to get these setups when it's hard for black to move the knight and kick you. But it still seems possible. But I guess this is just too passive, and then you get an e4. Interesting. Queen out. Yeah, interestingly, the last time I played against this guy, we also had a whole battle about who was going to play knight e5 and knight e4, and that ended up being kind of the crux of the position. And interestingly, we kind of get into that exact same thing today, and mentally I was prepared for him playing knight e4 as a common theme. It feels like something that this player likes to go for. All right, so anyway, so I play rook b1, and we have knight g6. And I was in this debate here of whether I go back to g3 or h2. The reason why I ended up choosing bishop h2, the reason being that on bishop g6, if the bishop's on g3, you're kind of forced into capturing. And I figured here I could kind of let the tension sit and kind of play my own plan. Ultimately, I probably, and he does play bishop d6, by the way, and I probably should have just traded. Computer definitely says trade. I had these weird ideas where I was like, if he trades, it'd be interesting to take back with the king, and there might be some variations where, you know, I even end up pushing the g-pawn and the rook wants to be on g1. I also thought that when you trade, you get his queen off of the back rank, and it kind of gives him a free tempo for development. And I didn't love that idea. So I decided to go with just my queen c2 plan here. I'm still going to play b4, but I wanted to get in queen c2 first. You're just kind of setting up some shadow pressure here, making it uncomfortable for black. So if ever, you know, and I'm thinking that he's trying for this e4 square, right? And I want to make sure that I'm denying the f5 square for the bishop. So I like having the queen here when there's no knight that's ready to jump in. So it feels like I'm controlling some valuable squares. If this knight ever moves, then this is vulnerable. There's some lines where if we play here and they trade, we can get a pawn attacking that knight. So queen c2 just seems like a solid move. I can get my rooks involved. Our opponent trades. All right, computer says these are basically equal, so it seems like this was an okay decision for me. As it played out in the game, my king ended up being kind of funky here, but it kind of drew him into attack, and so it's hard to say if it ended up being good for me or not. That's one of the big questions I have out of this game is like, was this the right decision to allow the trade there, or should I have traded? But yeah, this was just kind of playing on my instincts here, thinking that, you know, you're giving him the idea that he can do this check whenever he wants, which is kind of inconvenient, but he also still has to spend a tempo to get the queen off of there, and then you're kind of putting the decision in his hands. All right, so we had a5, denying the b4, and so I go a3. Interesting, the computer also likes just swinging the rook back over, and then maybe you're just trying to get in an e4. I'm not sure what that's totally about. I guess we can see what the computer line, what it wants to do with that. Queen e7, a3. And then you're, oops, all those lines are going crazy, but all right, computer's kind of not liking that anymore. All right, yeah, I'm not totally sure what that's about. I'm sure that our position is fine if we get in e4. We have the isolated queen pawn, but we have great piece movement, great piece activity. This bishop is always limited. And after this trade of bishops, right, we've traded the bishop that he had guarding all these nice dark squares for our bishop, which we also liked, but they were probably, similar in value, if not the black bishop being slightly more valuable. And I have my very nice bishop here compared to this one, right? So knights, pretty equivalent. Maybe his knights are slightly better than mine because this knight doesn't do too much here because of this pawn in particular. But I'm imagining that as I get this pawn break in, there's some possibilities that d5 becomes vulnerable. I can swing it into c5. So there's still a lot of potential with this knight. All right, so yeah, I went with a3, right? I don't see any reason why I shouldn't be going for my plan. Queen e7, just a solid developing move. But again, no reason why I shouldn't continue. Should we trade? Yeah, and then my opponent plays this b5 move. And so now we're in a really interesting setup here, right? Where, black has this open file, which is nice for them. I have a very nice long-term target here on c6. I think one of the reasons why b5 is such a nice move, even though it looks kind of ugly to backwardize your c-pawn, it stops the easy infiltration for the knight into c5. You can imagine, especially without that dark squared bishop, this square is looking so juicy. So if I can get a knight there, excellent. I even have ideas where maybe in the future I get a queen or a rook there. The thing is, it's going to be hard to get there. I have to go through d3 or b3. And so I'm looking now at, how do I maneuver the knight around? If I try and start that plan immediately, there's some weaknesses here where I start feeling a little bit vulnerable on the king side, right? He has both of the knights here. The bishop that hasn't moved all of a sudden has some scope, right? There's some lines that I had to calculate that end up, showing up in the game where I had to think a lot about the sacrifice of the bishop. And so moving this knight right now feels a little bit scary. All right, so we had b5, and I played rook c1, the f rook. Oh, the other thing that ends up happening with this king being out here that ends up being quite annoying is that because it wasn't on g1, this f2 pawn gets a little tender, right? Because black, if he's eyeing this e4 square, and I'm looking to maneuver my knights around, right? While I'm doing that, the f2 pawn becomes unguarded. The other thing is that I have to think about is this knight. I want to reposition this knight because it has absolutely no scope, right? It's achieving nothing offensively, but defensively it is guarding e4. And also importantly, I'm thinking about my b pawn, right? Oh, we talked about black's weaknesses, right? The c6 pawn, the c5 spot, the c5 outpost. But on my side, I have an isolated pawn that's in the line of fire of the queen. Having to keep my rook here to defend it's kind of annoying. And then there's a lot of lines where the rook can come down to a5, one of those rook outpost spots that actually becomes quite juicy. It can attack here, he can swing rooks and double up. So I don't want to play knight e2 immediately, even though computer said it was okay, but it does seem to like my move. Oh yeah, they're all +2, so these are all kind of the same. But that's the reason why I went with this over knight e2 immediately. So let's see. We can see when. Okay, so here's the moment. Our opponent strikes with knight e4. And so here was one of the biggest decisions of the game, I think. So this is definitely a spot I wanted to see the computer's opinion. So what I have going on is this knight's very powerful. I want to play knight e2, and then, you know, have this knight be more useful over here on the king side, and meanwhile maybe swing this knight around to c5. This position is relatively blocked up, so I imagine that I have time to make some of these maneuvers, but it's very annoying that this knight being here also keeps me from playing knight here, because again, they can capture. My rook felt tied down here. Interesting. Computer likes rook a1, which I imagine... Here, I'll just put this move in so that it's recorded. I end up trading, but let's look at this for a second. Because I imagine that on trades, if he tries to grab this, then we just take here, right? And then this is... Oh, you can even take this first. Yeah, that's nice. So even though that b4 pawn looks vulnerable, it's kind of hard for black to take it, which actually ends up being a theme later in the game anyway. So that's cool. Rook a1 was a move I should have taken more seriously. My big decision here was just like, well, certainly I don't want to take and get my pieces forked. So my decision is, do I let this knight sit? Do I play something like king g1 to then allow me to do a knight maneuver? Although then this knight wouldn't be well placed here because he could trade. But, you know, then that would allow me to maybe start the knight this way, force the decision out of this knight. He probably trades, and then I can bring the knight in here and putting pressure on c6. So that was kind of my debate, was between these two candidate moves. It's good to know I should be considering rook a1 more seriously. This bishop move makes a lot of sense. Let's give the computer a second to think through this position. But yeah, here... Oh, that's interesting. The bishop feels nicely placed here, but because it's there, it actually allows knight e2 now, because takes here would hang the bishop. Interesting. And then I think you still end up with these weaknesses where if the queen takes, we end up taking on c6 with tempo on the rook wherever it is, whether it's on e8 or a8. Okay. Yeah, so I wasn't considering rook a1, and it looks like I should have been thinking about that. I was figuring that either I'm hanging this pawn, or even if that's too sketchy for him to take, that just a simple move like bishop d7 defends the rook, and now I'm no longer defending my pawn. So I go with this capture here. My thesis here is that I'm giving up this bishop that I was pretty happy with earlier in the game, but I'm giving it up for a really strong knight, right? Not for this crappy bishop, but I'm giving it up for that knight that was exerting a lot of influence over my position. And then my idea here was that these knights are going to end up much stronger than this bishop. I figured that with the trade of pieces here, the opportunity for an attack on my king was much diminished. This square f5 is no longer very valuable for his bishop because now it's blunted by his pawn, right? So he's not threatening a skewer down the diagonal. And I'm basically, in my mind, I'm thinking if I can achieve a knight on c5 with this piece balance, where it's exerting influence over all these squares that the bishop might be living, it's going to be attacking e4. Basically, I'm feeling like my position is amazing if I can get a knight to c5. Fascinating that the engine likes knight g1 the best. Because in my mind, I want to route this knight to c5. But it likes knight e1 too. Interesting. So I go with knight d2. I think the most human move here, right? It's moving toward my plan of cycling the knight to c5. But in the meanwhile, it's also gaining a tempo by attacking the pawn, right? I'm expecting f5 to come, and on f5, you know, he's opening up the diagonal, which at the moment isn't that big of a threat. But once I get a knight to c5, you can see the knight would be looking at this e6 square, and then when the queen goes here, check, it can be pretty scary, right? So those are some of the ideas going on here. So I knew I'm inducing f5. But right away, instead of going right into the knight here, which might be dropping the pawn, it might be leaving the king side a little too open. I need to be thinking about what happens on f4. So I play knight e2. This is where I wanted this knight to go anyway. I have options to potentially stick it on f4 or at least defend against the push f4. There are lines where I kind of liked having it on g3, where I'm hitting some of his pawns, and it's kind of awkward for him to get the pawn to g6 to make that super diagonal, which would kind of blunt that knight. So yeah, so I went with the knight e2 move here. Multi-purpose move, right? So I'm rewriting the knight to the king side. I'm defending these squares against these incursions. At the same time, I'm opening up the queen for the attack on c6. And yeah, obviously he can throw in this check. Computer likes that. But still, the pawn is double attacked, so he still has to spend a tempo to defend it. The rook defending it from here feels kind of awkward. So he plays the very normal looking bishop d7. How would the computer wanted to do it this way? Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Because the bishop doesn't really do anything on d7, right? And this has been the thesis of my whole approach to this position from, move, 5, when he played pawn c6, was that I'm trying to take advantage of this bad bishop. Knight e7. This knight would be so well placed here on e7 because it guards c6, guards f5, covers this square on d5. It could potentially go to d5, where it attacks this, covers this square, covers c3. So d5 is a very nice square for that knight, and also it defends a lot of important things. So that makes sense that queen d6, knight e7 was actually his best move here. So he goes bishop d7, the most normal looking move, the most human looking move to defend this. Not that is like a crazy computer line. But also another interesting note, right? That was another problem created by my king being on h2. So it's interesting to think about, and I was thinking about this all game, right? Was my king better placed on g1? But obviously I have to weight that against the fact that, against the tempo. He would have had his queen on d6, and so he would have been a tempo up anyway. What I liked about the bishop being on d7 is that it allows me to play this knight b3 move, right? Because now on captures, I have knight c5, discovered attacking the queen, attacking the bishop on d7, and if he goes for either queen a5 or queen a3, so that when I take the bishop, then the queen comes back to d6, forking me, I always have knight e5, which will give up a pawn, but I've won a piece. Sorry for all of the arrows, but I hope you can kind of see that, is that when the knight's here, then the queen being on c7 or d6, is putting me in check and attacking the knight there, but I always have this knight retreat, so I don't lose the piece back. So I liked this kind of construction here. So this knight b3 felt good. And then here's where it gets really spicy, is our opponent goes for the strike f4, which I did not expect. I know he's, a somewhat aggressive player, but it didn't feel like there was enough here. I was debating, I figured that I had to take because it felt like allowing f3 was going to be really weakening, right? Because then my h3 pawn gets really weak, whether I trade or not. Maybe I'm forced into playing a g4 move and then the queen comes here. So it's really interesting that the computer thinks I survived this line with knight c5. And also I was debating the lines of whether it's better to take, then take with the pawn, or if it's better to take with the pawn. So I actually took with the pawn, which is not what the computer likes. But yeah, taking with the pawn, my idea here was that this knight ends up being a nice defensive resource in a lot of lines that I was looking at. And this knight was not as scary of an attacker. But yeah, the computer does not like that decision by me, so we'll see how it wants to punish it. It looked like immediately it's, Stockfish wants to play e3, which is what my opponent did, and gives him a nice position, nice initiative. So this looks like this was a mistake for me, but I had multiple options to do okay. So what would happen on takes? Just wants us to give this up, but then we're in an even position. All right, so this is what we really have to understand, is how does this line, right? I love the position of this knight here, but I thought that f3 was too scary. So it says takes. So I guess that by playing knight c5, it's not to use the powerful knight on c5. You're playing knight c5 so that you can trade off for the bishop, which makes him not having the light squared bishop all of a sudden makes the h3 weakness a lot less scary. And then our weakness on b4 is well guarded. He's putting pawns in awkward positions here, and we have c6 to attack that. I guess that's the whole idea here. So takes. Huh, yeah, I should have looked at this more carefully. I was not thinking about achieving the knight on c5 to trade it. But I should have thought about that more seriously when I was worried about this h3 pawn. Because yeah, now all of a sudden this pawn is kind of too far advanced. This is becomes a weakness instead of a strength. c6 is a weakness. Yeah, at this point now, the more pieces we can trade off, it should just be a nicely winning endgame, right? If I can pick up this pawn, yeah, my structure is better. I can still go after this pawn in the endgame. Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, I was too scared of f3, and maybe f3 is really bad if you do anything but. I guess you can just play knight g3, but still that line ends up taking on d7, so you still have to trade it. Okay, so f3 would have been okay to allow if I had thought about trading for the bishop. Okay, that's great to know. So yeah, so we're here, our opponent plays here. So yeah, I took with the pawn. So it'll be interesting to see why this was a bigger mistake, and taking with the knight would have been fine. So our opponent plays the move e3, right? Powerful strike here. Which now, if trades, then the queen is attacking here. My knight is vulnerable. I'm definitely losing a pawn back. My d4 pawn starts looking weak. But yeah, again, I play a move that was, not recommended, it seems like. So it's interesting. Rook f1, so that on trades you get the rook to f2 and it kind of holds things down. But yeah, all of a sudden, we're starting to look pretty vulnerable, right? We have these pawns here. So yeah, our opponent finds a really nice idea with this f4. Ignoring the fact that the computer says white is good here. This was a really tough spot to make good decisions in. And I burned 13 minutes here to, first I burned like 7 minutes here to take and make the wrong decision. Then he plays e3, and I use another 13 minutes to play the wrong move, right? So then I play f3. So now, we're at move 24. I have 31 minutes left. My opponent, after his move here, which he finds the best computer move, very nice move here, queen f7. My opponent has 52 minutes to my 31, so I'm already in a bit of a time jam. My position's starting to look a lot more vulnerable. I assume that I'm just losing a pawn back, and so I'm thinking, what is the best way for me to basically gambit? I mean, not that it's a gambit, we're not in the opening anymore, but to give up that pawn to get some activity. Super interesting. Computer just says knight c5, allow the skewer here, because that's the thing, right? This pawn moving off of here has now hey, we got someone in chat here. Oh no, they're gone. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, now that the pawn got off of e4, so our opponent has a great move here with this queen f7. Not only is it attacking f4, right? Because I was expecting queen h4 here, right? Which is very aggressive. It attacks the pawn, but this queen is really nicely placed here because I was worried now about the bishop. I think the computer's just saying, hey, give it up. Or go for the block, which now feels like goes into the self pin. So the computer actually says, allow this, but pin yourself. And then we end up in this line. Wow. And yeah, this is feeling really uncomfortable. I'm dropping this. This pawn is all of a sudden well guarded. The c6 weakness is a lot less juicy because there's just bigger problems. Yeah, this is really nicely played by our opponent here. So I'm thinking I need to stop this bishop f5, and I know I'm going to lose this f4 pawn anyway. So I go with knight g3, which seems logical, right? I want to control some valuable squares. I know I'm going to give up this pawn, but I still know that if when I achieve my knight to c5, I have some nice positioning. I was thinking about places that he could throw in this h5 move. I don't think I was too worried about it because it's also opening up weaknesses of his own. Like his knight can become vulnerable here. And then as see in the game, I'm able to get my king out of the way. And if I can get my king out of the way, then I'm not too worried about the pawn coming up. So let's see, where do we go here? So our opponent takes with the queen, which makes a lot of sense. Now I'm thinking about this menace of the h pawn running down. But what's nice is that on this I have queen takes g6, and so the queen feels scary here on f4, but it doesn't look like it's achieving much, and it was also defending the bishop on d7. So this seems like it was a mistake, and yeah, the computer thinks he should have just taken with the knight, or queen t5. Interesting. But yeah, so you can see that like queen takes f4 opened up a few weaknesses of his own, right? This is loose, this is loose. My knight looks awkward here, but it's actually really hard for him to attack. If he had a dark squared bishop or a better placed knight, like the f6 knight instead of this knight, right, then there'd be knight h5, really scary stuff. But yeah, queen takes f4. So now I finally get my knight to c5, what I've been trying to do for at least 10 moves now. And so our opponent is kind of forced. What's nice about this knight being here is that I'm guarding f5. And so again, I forced this bishop back into the corner, into c8. So this is, computer says minus 0.5. But, honestly, like, I'm feeling okay about my position, I think, after the queen takes and knight takes c5. I've got my knight to a great position where it's dominating this bishop. This knight's a little bit awkward, but it's hard for him to attack. His knight here doesn't look like it's doing much. Maybe he needs to think about some kind of rerouting move like this. And then, and I was pretty happy here. Right after getting the knight to c5, this beautiful spot, I pull it back to knight e4, which actually a computer loves that move, so it's nice to see. But what we achieved was we got the bishop away from the defense of this pawn. Now this knight and this knight are supporting each other, so now I can get my king out of the pin. And then all of a sudden, this knight's also cutting off the rook. This pawn that we moved up to f3 is now guarding this really crucial e4 square. So yeah, all of a sudden we're looking like we have some play, right? This diagonal is weak. What I was debating was whether I wanted to throw in queen b3 check when he wasn't able to play bishop e6. So I was debating whether I should throw that in first or not. That was another thing I wanted to get computer input on. Because I know that my long-term plan is that I'm, going knight here. I'm going after this pawn. But yeah, I decided I wanted to keep this check kind of in my back pocket, which it looks like ends up being the right decision here. So yeah, so we go knight c4, and then he's forced to move his bishop back. So now we've got the knight from this b3 square out to a much nicer square on e4. Looks like the computer just wants us to repeat and get the draw. But, at this point, I was feeling okay about my position again, right? My two isolated pawns are really hard for him to attack, really easy for me to defend. These knights are looking really strong. This pawn is looking vulnerable. So yeah, I'm feeling like I have some play here. So I do not go for the repetition. On bishop d7. All right, so now I play rook e1, which computer hates because, yeah, that idea that we were talking about, like there's knight e7 ideas where that knight is all of a sudden coming to some really powerful squares. But how's he defending this pawn, right? I'm thinking that once I am able to get a knight to attack this pawn, I have queen check, which is going to attack the pawn. Look, it's starting to get really hard for him to hold that. So what do we got? So I got rook e1, and then my opponent plays rook a3, which seems like it makes sense. You're bringing the rook down, and then there's some ideas maybe of doubling the rooks on the a file, because now the rook has been kind of cut off on the e file. But yeah, after this move, it didn't seem right, because I had this rook b3 concept. And so yeah, I think that he starts running into problems on trades. Then this is great, right? Then I have the check. I'm picking up the e pawn. He can defend, or the other idea I was looking at was rook a4. And on rook a4, what was I liking there? On rook a4, we do have the fork, and then he can pull back. But then the rook is now guarding e3. I'm not sure if that's right. All right, yeah, we can consult the computer and see what it would do here. It would just take... Oh, tactics. Aha. That's nice. Okay. So now you're forcing some reaction out of them. On this one, what is it like? Okay, then it says just bring the queen up and defend things. And now I'm up a pawn. But yeah, so this rook a3 move looked logical, and then but it turns out the knight e7 would have been better, which he does have this idea in mind. He plays it later, so I think he found himself just executing the right ideas with the wrong move order. Kind of like what was going on with my position earlier too, right? Where I didn't set all the captures in the right way, and that's just how crazy and complicated chess is, right? So yeah, he has some of the right ideas, but I find this rook b3 idea, and so he plays the move that makes a lot of sense, right? This is the move that logically is the move that should follow after playing rook a3, because obviously he's going to see that I have rook b3. I don't think that caught him by surprise at all. But my idea was that I'm going to execute the same idea either way. My king's coming back to g1, my knight's coming to f1, and then I'm going to hit e3. And then my idea after he played rook a3 was, if I can do the same thing but minus a pair of rooks, there's some nice vulnerabilities that can develop in the black king side. Because I was looking at lines where, because obviously here I could go with something like, I'm looking at queen b2, he has a much more obvious defense there, but I'm thinking about like what happens when the rook, if he tries to hold e3 by bringing the rook over here. And then I thought, if we've traded the pair of rooks, then all of a sudden I have like the queen getting into his position, right? So we go here, he goes rook here, and I trade. rook takes a3. Okay. So now I'm thinking here I want to execute my plan. Which it looks like there was a bunch of better moves. So interesting to see that. Okay. Yeah, this is good to see. So the other idea, as I mentioned earlier, is that I was looking at the lines with here, here, and then first I was thinking about this queen check and getting the queen in, and then I was thinking there's a lot of lines where getting the queen here and then the rook coming here gets really scary, right? Because if I can get the queen behind the rook, then all of a sudden I have checkmates on g8, even if he creates Luft here. And if he tries to block the diagonal with the bishop, then c6 drops, right? So this becomes a very vulnerable position. And it looks like I should have done that now instead of waiting one move. I think I was too worried about this stuff, about h5. So then I was, I'm looking at these lines with check, and then I was like, if I try and go for the attack here, but then, I didn't see where I would finish it, and all of a sudden I'm in a lot of trouble. I have back rank problems, and computer says that was wrong, so I was scared of that. So what did I miss? On h5, I could just play king g1. Wow. Then here, oh, then that drops. But if he doesn't guard this diagonal and just plays like h4, oh, you don't even go wow. You don't even go after the king with this attack. You just trap the rook. I was thinking about, I did see some of those ideas in the game, but man, is it hard to do something like that when your king's under threat. But just this quiet king g1 move against h5, I did not see that. Wow. So you play rook a1 first, induce this, then you move the king back, and then you threaten these traps, you threaten this. Oh, that is hard to find. Wow. So because of that, but it actually loves this move here. And his best move is to sack. What about here? Then we just kick the rook. Yeah, that's a much cleaner way to go about this. Why didn't I like knight c5 here? Computer likes the sack. And this does look scary. It gives it even. Is there a repetition or something? This is scary. Yeah, I just end up in a repetition. Was I thinking that he was going to sack there on knight c5? I don't remember. Shoot, I don't remember. But yeah, so anyway, we go into this line. I go king g1. So here I'm, the same issue that he had earlier and that I had even before that is this the move orders, right? We have all the right ideas, and it's just so hard to execute them in the right order because of the small differences in how it shakes out. So I'm thinking about all these concepts, but just at the wrong time. So yeah, king g1. Not that I'm losing or anything. Computer says even position here. Looks like it just advocates for queen f7. Just give up the pawn, I imagine. Queen f7, queen c1, queen a2. And what's the reason I can't take there? All right, we'll look at that in a second. Let me just get the actual move in. So yeah, now he goes for that knight e7 line, which the computer loved 2 moves ago, and all of a sudden hates it now, right? Or doesn't love it. Before, in this position, it gave it a -7 advantage, And now it's just barely holding on to an even position. So we went trades, trades, trades. King G1, knight here. Okay, but let's see. How does this line shake out? I didn't understand why. What goes wrong when I take? It's just because of this threat. And back. Huh, so I've won a pawn, but these weaknesses give black more than compensation. Wow. And if I go here, he has like a check, or, oh, I hit 92, yeah. Wow, so black should just sack the pawn to get that knight f4 move after queen a2. Now that's some computer chess. To see that you should sack this by going here, queen here, and then you get the knight here to then attack across this diagonal, and then say it's okay to trade queens and that you still have enough power and initiative. Wow. Okay. But, oh, yeah, computer doesn't hate 97 now. It's also 0-0, but it just doesn't have the advantage that he had earlier, which is cool to think that I had this idea that trading a pair of rooks was good for me, and it looks like that is bearing fruit. Okay. So 97. Okay, now I play the queen b2 move. Looks like I would have been better going here. I was going b2 because I was still looking at the lines where he tries to hold e3 with this. And then I go rook here. Interesting, that's actually not the way to do it. You're supposed to go here. And then do I trap the rook at the end? Yeah, tactics, tactics. Always tactics. That's what's crazy about analyzing with a computer. And if he goes back, you just trap the rook. Oh, shoot. Okay. Where did I end up here? How did I get? Okay. Oh, fix that. Okay. So yeah, I was looking at going into this. Looks like I actually had even better plans. And my opponent saw that, he would be in trouble if he came across. And so I still liked, so I guess because he's kind of forced into the retreat, I would have been better off with the queen here, and I could have just immediately won the pawn. All right. Yeah, interesting again. The computer likes getting in a rook trade. But yeah, I went with the normal looking move, right? This has clearly been my plan, was to get the king back, get the knight here, put the pressure. And what I liked about this was that he gets the knight to this nice square on d5, but with my queen on b3, which again, this is why I didn't like it on c1, right? I want to achieve the queen on b3, and then I have a pin to his king, and so all of a sudden this knight that looks really strong on d5 is kind of betrayed by this open diagonal, right? So I play knight f1, he plays knight d5, I play queen b3. So yeah, oh wow, again, my opponent, like, he has the right ideas, but doesn't get them in the right order, because queen h4 is strong here, right? Attacking the rook. I imagine that here I'll play the move he played first. So he goes here. So on here, rook c1, and then you just say, I'm gonna win this anyway. What happens on here? Is it bad because of here? And it's just hard for us to take, because takes here. Yeah. I see that f4 square. Because, yeah, what happens in these lines is because I'm looking at, I was thinking about bishop e6, but I'm thinking that the only way for him to discover to attack my queen, he has to defend the bishop, and it's by bringing the knight back. But by vacating the f4 square with queen h4, it makes that knight f4 move even stronger, and it's defending this e2 square, which my rook very naturally could have gone to, probably would have at this point when I'm running into time trouble. Yeah. So my opponent goes for a cool idea, right? Even though the knight is pinned, if he captures b4, I can't take it. And it's almost impossible for me to defend b4, right? So this is a very nice looking idea, but it doesn't work because I have takes. And then on rook takes, I can just take here, right? Sack my queen, but I get his queen, and all of a sudden I'm up a piece. And there's no great desperados for him. And so yeah, we can look into those lines for a second, right? Takes, and then if he instead decides to move the queen or something, then I can take this. But I was looking at I have double check, right? And so he has to take and lose the rook or trade the queens. So I don't know if he missed this. He still had time at this point. When I play knight takes e3, or he plays rook a4, and he used about 9 minutes here, from 25 minutes-ish to about 16 minutes. So, he's calculating a lot. I don't think there's any way he would have missed this idea. So maybe he thought that he had some other long-term pressure, or he had the bailout with the queen h4, getting it out of this attack. Maybe he was looking at that, but then in some of those lines, queen h4, if we had captured here, and then we could capture the rook and defend the rook. Oh, sorry, we got a cat here, Mari. I'm trying to analyze this game, okay? Okay, so anyway, we take. And so time check. He has 16 minutes after rook a4. I play knight takes e3, and I have 9 minutes left. I don't think I mentioned this is a game in 90 with 30-second increment for the whole game. So I take here. And yeah, interesting that still this bishop e6 move is recommended. I think we just end up in this trade here. So he plays queen h4, so let's look at this for a minute. Because yeah, the tactics get real crazy, right? I was thinking about trading, and then we're just in an even game here. I was thinking about this, but I wasn't sure if it worked. But on takes, I just have queen a3. Interesting. And these are some scary threats. This knight, we always wanted that knight on c5, right? But yeah, so knight c5 would have been good here. On bishop e6. Alright, so our opponent finds this idea that just a little bit ago would have been very powerful, and now is game losing. Right, so he plays queen h4, which makes a lot of sense. Again, he's vacating a square here, but again, the knight's pinned, so maybe it's not worth that much. He's attacking my loose rook. But, how's he going to deal with this weakness on d5? He attacks me, but I just have g3, right? I think that he felt, this was too weakening for me. And obviously, this whole game, I've been worried about my king getting attacked. But at this point, again, I'm super low on time. I played g3, so I had 9 minutes. I spent 3 of my 9 minutes on g3 because I have to calculate, mainly queen h5, which I expected was the response, and then I'm just trading. And we'll look at that line in a second. But yeah, then my opponent, he still is 16 minutes, and he plays this very quickly, I'm not sure. I didn't record a time on this move because I was in time trouble myself. But Yeah, he must have thought that his attack was coming through, but this knight just ends up being a superstar, right? It's holding the g3 pawn. He just doesn't have a way to coordinate his pieces for an attack. And I figured that, especially with him not having a rook on the back rank, I thought if I get through his position on d5, I have to be winning. I didn't have time to calculate everything, but I just had this idea that if I get here, like, this has to be winning for me, because my knight's defending everything. My queen defends a2, so he can't get the rook in. Right, my rook's defending the back rank, and all of a sudden he's having back rank problems. There's all kinds of... If I'm ever able to get a knight attack with check, the rook is unveiled. This queen is tied to the bishop. So yeah, this is looking real sketchy for him. Wow, that's crazy that the computer would go g4. That's so brave. And then on takes, you just take this, and you're defending all the squares that they could check you. Wow. That's brave computer stuff. But yeah, so I didn't see that line, but I just had the intuition that if I break through on d5, this has to be winning for me, and that my knight's holding together all my defenses. So yeah, so I was assuming he was going to play queen h5, and I was thinking that trades, and then I didn't quite calculate all this out, but yeah, I think I was calculating this line, queen f7, and I wasn't quite sure, I didn't see everything here. Computer actually likes all these other moves better. I don't know how, when we're both in time trouble, there's no way he doesn't play queen f7 to guard this. And then it turns out that this is very dangerous. But yeah, because on takes, and yeah, everything's defended, right? And I have the tempo. If he has to send a tempo there, here I'm just getting the bishop. Takes here, mate. So yeah, I was looking at this. Yeah, I didn't calculate out to this line, but I figured I was okay here. I also thought that I could play knight here, which has a nice little fork here. Obviously he can defend. And then yeah, I knew I had some pawn weaknesses, but this looked nice for me in my mind. Even though I have some problems to solve. You can sack a pawn to get this one, and then your position's looking great. But yeah, so my opponent captures here, and I was like, this can't be right. So I take, and I think that, I think he just missed this tactic here. So he goes bishop here. Oh, wow. Yeah, so I had 5 minutes. I spent 2 minutes on this, debating between these two moves. I think he was calculating this line and saying that, okay, so I played knight here, which I think is just the most clean way to win this game. Because I didn't have time to find all the lines here, because I was worried that on king here, wow, okay, because I assume this is what he calculated too, is that, is that even though I won the knight here, I'm losing it back, but you just give it back. Wow. And not even play knight g5 because that loses this. Then you just play this. Wow. Because then you're getting into d6. So you just give the knight back to lure the king out to the center, and you're just crushing. So on here, there's this. Yeah. Winning the queen. Yeah, I did not see that. I was weighing the difference between, this check, the king comes out. I felt like that position was probably good for me, but with only 5 minutes left on my clock, I'm looking at, at this line, and I was like, I'm fairly certain I can win this end game. And I need to preserve, a little bit of time on my clock. Thankfully, we have 30-second increment, so I'm not going to be stuck, blitzing everything in 2 seconds, but you still want to, have a little bit of time to process this. Okay, so knight f4. My handwriting gets very sloppy here because I'm writing everything in, as fast as I can. But I wanted to keep record of the moves because I know, after 5 minutes, I believe the rule is when one player is below 5 minutes, both players can stop taking notation. But it takes 2 seconds or less to write the move, and I really wanted to make sure I had the moves to analyze later, and so I decided I was gonna use the extra 2 seconds every move. But I write very sloppy here. Okay, so he sacks the queen, desperado, to win a pawn. And if he's able to pick up b4, all of a sudden it's 4 pawns against 2. And so, he's only down, 1 point, technically, of material. Obviously, in the end game, those same valuations don't really apply. It's really just about the activity of how dangerous those pawns are, right? And so this b pawn could get pretty dangerous. The reason why I was okay going into this line, again, this was what I was calculating, was the reason I didn't go into this knight e7 was because if I was losing b4, I would have gone into knight e7. But I calculated this line, which is exactly what ended up happening, was I figured that I had rook here. It looks like computer just likes defending it. I kind of liked this idea, which in retrospect now I'm giving up this good file. But my idea was like, if he plays the very natural blitz move, take here, now the rook is trapped, or he's losing his bishop. So I played rook b1, and then once the bishop moves, now I'm defending this. Bishop c4, I centralize my knight. I figure I need to get as much activity with my pieces as I can, especially trying to target this pawn or any other weaknesses I can find. And I was thinking if I can trade off this bishop, that's got to be a much simpler win. So he goes h6. Yeah, and computer likes that kind of thinking, right? It's like you go knight. The computer wants a knight g6 to really just clamp down on his moves. I imagine that that on here you go check, and then you win the pawn. Yeah, I did not see that. I went with the second best computer move. So I went knight d6, because what I'm noticing is all of a sudden this bishop has nowhere to go that my knights are not influencing, or my rook, right? And so all of a sudden I'm gonna achieve a trade. He goes g5. I take, and on takes here, then he has these awkward doubled pawns here. On takes here, this pawn becomes very isolated. So I thought this either capture was good for me. He does this one. Oh wow, yeah, that's cool. I could have just played d5, say, hey, take my knight. You're not going to stop my pawns, and then you can just roll the pawns down. That would have been a pretty cool way to finish this game. I did not see that. I played knight e2. He starts activating his king. Makes sense. I activate mine. He plays king e6. And so yeah, I should have already just gone for this and given up this pawn. So I made a mistake here, I think. I played knight c3. And I'm trying to remember, again, I'm playing all my moves here on the 30-second increment. I had a couple ideas. One being that I'm, cutting off these squares. So I'm cutting off the advancement of the king. But I just, this is the most obvious move in the world, right? Rook a3. And I thought I had something against this that I did not. So yeah, he plays rook a3. So then all of a sudden I'm feeling a little bit stupid because like that's the most obvious move, and I forget what I saw. I thought I had something with knight e4 and rotating it into c5 or something, but clearly that doesn't work. That just, he goes here, and all of a sudden my ability to win this position gets a lot more sketchy. So I am proud of myself for playing the move here. Sorry, I have a cat again. For just admitting that my last move was wrong and saying I'm just going to bring the knight back. Say, hey, I made a mistake, but I think I can hold this position. These pawns are being held by these pieces. If he tries to activate here, these might get loose. It makes sense that the computer just wants the rook to come back, probably to defend things from the back. You usually want to guard pawns from the back with the rook. But if he goes for that kind of idea, most likely I'm going to be able to win the c4 pawn. My opponent goes for, so after I retreat, knight e2. He brings the king in here, which makes a lot of sense. And then I actually burned, so I have 4 minutes here, because I've regained a little bit of time from the increment. And then I burned half my time, 2 minutes, because I'm debating between these two moves, which feels good to see the computer agree that this and this were my two best moves. I played rook h1, which I was really happy about. But it was so tempting to play this one because there's some fun tactics where, here, and then if the king tries to go here, then you're going to win the c4 pawn with this check. And then if the king retreats, then you're going to win the h6 pawn. But what I didn't like about this is it gets a little bit sketchy with this. I was like, okay, then I was assuming I was going to play rook back, and I'd be able to cover c1, and then I'm going to bring my king to try and win the g pawn while the knight holds everything down. So if he commits his king to the queen side to defend this, then my king's going to commit here, and then we trade everything down, and I'll run the f pawn and win. But yeah, this looked a little bit more sketchy, so instead the line I calculated was here. The reason why I thought this was going to work out was because I'm able to take, and then when I get the rook here, or rather here, rook back, I can capture here with check, then I get the rook to c5, and it's going to guard this. So on c3, which is what he played, yeah, right, I have takes here. And so now, obviously what I had to calculate was the most threatening move here, where pawn's one move from promoting. He could reinforce it with this, or the sneakier rook a2 to try and reinforce it with this pin. And if I have to retreat, then, it gets a little bit sketchy, but I figured I always had these ideas. So even if he goes into this thing, I can take, wherever the king goes, I have rook c5 in this really nice c5 outpost again, right, from that we were targeting from early on in the game, ever since he played b5. The c5 outpost stops all of black's threats, and so this is now an easy conversion to a win here. So he sees that, he tries to create some play here with rook b3, but I play rook h5, rook takes b4, takes here, and he resigns. So yeah, this is all of the scary play that black may have had has been dissipated. I gave up the b4 pawn to win these two pawns, and then now my endgame concept is, even if he's supporting c3, if we trade everything down, I'm happy to give up my knight, because now that I eliminated these two pawns, my whole goal is going to be to run the f pawn and win. So yeah, it was a tricky game, interesting game. Credit to my opponent for finding a lot of very scary lines and making it really challenging. And it's just a testament to how complicated that position was, that we were both playing with a lot of the right ideas and not executing them at the right time, which is just brutal when you watch the computer tell you how badly you played it. But we're two 2,000 rated players trying to navigate a crazy position, and obviously a computer rated 3000 or whatever it is going to tell you all of the multitude of mistakes that you made. But yeah, I think the concepts were interesting. The things that I wanted to review was that early on, should I have allowed him to trade the bishop? And the computer slightly liked me taking his bishop better. So that's good to know. I was definitely feeling that because my king got kind of awkward here at h2. Computer, ultimately said that it was fine. But I'd probably trade this in a future game if I got the same position. And then I wanted to test whether my idea that the giving up the bishop was the right call. And it looks like it was when we went into this line. But I was feeling good about this position. But computer says it's equal. But I like my play here. I think I have pretty clear plans. Target this. This pawn is really strong. Get a knight to c5. I was also looking at lines where when I would want to play queen c5 to try and get a, say on something like this. I didn't play it here, but thinking about ideas where when I should do this. In this case, obviously, it's awkward. Sorry, because of rook a2, but I think there's some lines where we're having a rook here, if I'm able to get a knight to go to reinforce, or maybe the knight comes into a5. There's some lines where that can be pretty strong. I think once the queens are off the board, it makes a move like knight a5 a lot better. With the queens on, I want the knight centralized so that it can defend as well as attack. But yeah, if we traded the queens, then all of a sudden knight a5, rook on c5 feels a lot stronger. But yeah, cool game. And yeah, I think we have the last round of this tournament next week. If I have some time, I'll try and review that one as well. All right.